Hello, welcome to my talk, Family History from Military Records. My name is Chris Baker. I'm a military historian who researches soldiers, sailors and airmen for a living. I'm going to tell you first a little bit about why I chose to talk about family history from military records, and it relates to my own experience as a researcher. In the mid-90s, I started building a website all about my interest, the British Army in the First World War. It's called The Long, Long Trail. It's still in existence. I add something to it every day, and it attracts literally thousands of visitors every day. In a recent complete month, for instance, there were 53,000 unique individual visitors to the site. It's an awful lot of traffic, completely free to use. But each page carries a little click-through advert to my research service, which is called 1418. Now, obviously, not everyone who visits the main site wants to click through to that, but it attracts, 10 to 20 maybe a day, something like that. People who are curious, and inevitably some of those filter through to me in terms of inquiry or an order for researching an individual. That's how most of my work comes in. Over the years, I've also become part of the network that works for Who Do You Think You Are and other TV programs in the background, where there's military research is concerned. Of course, there's only me, one per day, so I can only tackle so much of this stuff. But over the many years in which I've been doing this for a living, I've now accumulated over 10,000 individual life stories, because I don't just focus on the military or naval aspect. I try to put the man's story back together. And when you do that, you learn an awful lot, of course, about where the records are and how to find them and what they mean and all that sort of thing. Now, when people come to me, it's dawned upon me that they're coming from two different angles, sometimes mixed together. The first angle is when my inquirer already knows about the individual from a family tree viewpoint. Sometimes it's even a father or grandfather. So they know who he is, where he came from, who his next of kin were and all that sort of thing. And they're just after the military story. But others come from a slightly different viewpoint, which is they know a little about this man perhaps, but they're hopeful that his military records can help unlock other aspects of his story around his family. So they're seeing roadblocks in terms of understanding perhaps who he married or where he lived, where he died, all that sort of thing, and they're hopeful that these things will be teased out in military records. It's not always possible. It depends on the type of record, as I will explain, and the type of service the man had. But it's amazing how many little nitty-gritty bits of family information are buried in military records, and I thought you might enjoy understanding where they are and how it might help you with your own research. So I'm going to run through the sorts of records that are around and pick out where the family and personal information can be found and the sort of thing it might give you. But also put it in context as to why those things were created in the first place and why they're written the way they are. So really I'm wrapping two things together here in this talk. One is where information can be found not about the individual serviceman or woman, but about family. So a next of kin, a father, a wife, etc. Or other relatives, children, sometimes a next of kin who wasn't a parent. And sometimes there are more details about them, like private addresses and occupations that can be found. That's what I would describe as family information. But also military records give you a lot of non-military personal information about the individual, or at least they can in some cases. Everything from his height and his weight and the colour of his eyes, down to his medical condition, but more occupation, where he lived, and things that actually often explain quite a lot about why his military service was the way it was. So I'm going to touch on both of these kinds of information as we go through. So why was this stuff recorded at all? Well, primarily from the viewpoint of the War Office or Admiralty, it was for two purposes. One was to ensure the correct identification of the individual. This was particularly so if it came to the man or woman dying while in service, because it was to do with the disposal of their financial and other effects. They wanted to know this stuff, and they wanted to be sure that they'd got the right man connected to the right next of kin for the disposal of these things. That's primarily it. Of course, there are lots of other reasons why they want to identify the man in terms of his military movements, but from a family viewpoint, it's important that they got that exterior viewpoint absolutely correct, and I'll show you why. The second and most overriding reason, though, is not to do with service itself. It is to do with money. And an awful lot of the records that still exist today were actually driven by the need for proper accounting of money while in and after service. So money drives payments of pensions, it drives payments of separation allowance while the man is in the services. It drives the transfer of any money owed to the family of a man who's lost his life, for instance, but also in other aspects of the valuation and the final settlement of his estate. So this is a matter of the state dealing with those things with the family. A lot of this is driven by the financial factors behind the service. Now, I have to say that not all records were created equal. Some types of records are very rich in personal and family detail, some not. And it gets worse when you start to look at the three different services. In general, army records, particularly those that start to be in the shape we know them today, which is about the 1870s, 1880s, are very good. If you can find them, they're going to give you a lot of information. At the other extreme, naval records are very fragmented and very often give you very little family and personal information. I don't know why this chap on the slide is smiling, because he's in the worst of the three services from this viewpoint. And in the middle we have Air Force records, which start to be created from 1918 as a separate third service. Some family and personal information in them, not much. And also Army records. The further you go back in time, the less and less likely you are to uncover good family and personal information. So I'm just going to quickly run through where the Army records are. If your man served at any point after 1922, the records are not public. They're available on application from the Ministry of Defence's Veterans Agency. They also have some of the Guards regiment records from the Great War period. Before that, if the man served from 1914 through 1922, his records are public. They're all in the care of the National Archives, various categories. I won't bore you with those at the moment, it's not really germane to the talk, but a bunch of different categories. The bottom two being officers' records, which are in separate collections. If we go back before 1914, so a man who was in service and then out of service by 1914, they're also in the public domain with the National Archives in a collection listing like that, the bottom two being officers' records separate again. Now, the items I've highlighted in green here have all been digitized and are all available through the internet to you. So you'll see that for all the records of men who were out of the army by 1922, that is the vast majority of records for men who are not officers. There are one or two tiny categories that are not digital yet, but officers' records not. So it's easy in 9/10 of cases to look online and be sure you're covering all the bases, even though, of course, a lot of these records no longer exist. The WO363 series are the ones that are left after a major fire in 1940, for example.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. To watch the extended uninterrupted version, go to familyhistory.tv, link in the description. You will also find a host of talks from other experts on a variety of subjects. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when these videos become available.